So what I'm going to try to do tonight is share a little bit about our unique journey, and every journey in diabetes is unique, and then try to maybe spend a little bit of time on how it felt and what we learned from it. So let me tell you a little story about our son Sam, who's now 16. Sam was diagnosed when he was 8, and I first have to give a little bit of a disclaimer here because being diagnosed when you're 8 is a real blessing. And it's a blessing because you've had 8 years. And it's a blessing because when someone has the joy of childbirth and then they get the immediate news that something's wrong with their son or daughter, I can't think of anything that's more challenging for a family, for a mother or dad. And so to not have to go through that, we've always thought was a real blessing. But Sam, came into the world, and he's always had an amazing heart. But he came into the world, and he had some challenges. And one challenge was that he was also, in addition, when he first came into the world, he had no 3D vision. So that meant that when something was coming toward him, like a ball that you would normally throw your son or daughter, it would hit him in the face. So that's not, that's survivable. And then Sam was what my mom would call husky. So husky is not really used much anymore, but it really means kind of fat. And so he had these thick glasses. He looked kind of like the character in Jerry Maguire. Thick glasses, couldn't really play any sports, and he had diabetes. And that's pretty tough at 8 years old. And when Sam was diagnosed, I was traveling, and it took 2 plane rides to get out to see him. And those plane rides, I still remember them because I was very anxious. And I felt anxious because I had to tell him. Now, I know what most of you are thinking. You're thinking I had to tell him that he had diabetes. Well, remember, he was 8, and he was in the hospital. And so he was old enough to understand what was happening to him. And he was scared. So he expected not to tell him that he had diabetes because he knew that. He expected me to tell him that it would be okay. And he expected me to tell him that I would fix it. Because as a dad, that's what you're supposed to do. And all of you who are moms and dads know that feeling. You know it when you see a young child fall down and get hurt. Your natural instinct is to help because that's kind of a genetic thing that we all come up with. And when it's your child, your natural instinct is to spring, to do whatever you need to do to help your child. And so I arrived after having a few hours to think about this, and I bit my tongue and then my cheek, and everything I could do so I wouldn't cry and so I wouldn't seem as scared as I really was. And then I told him that we would find a cure for him. And I told him that we'd spend whatever time it took and whatever money it took to do that. And just as Diane said, that day my life changed in a big way. But there was a lot more change to come, and I didn't really realize that. In fact, as I started to get as comfortable as you can ever get with a diagnosis like this, I started to tell people, I'm going to find a cure for this. I'm going to do that because I had to, because I made a promise to my son. And then I went to see an old professor of mine who's been a lifelong mentor to me. And he broke the news to me, and he said, Glenn, you can help, but I need to tell you something that's going to be hard for you to understand. And he said, this is bigger than you, and you can't do this alone. You're going to need to ask for help, and you're going to need to ask for a lot of help. And I know that's going to be hard for you to do because it doesn't come naturally to you. And in fact, you've spent a big part of your life trying to make it so you wouldn't have to ask for help. And that's when I really understood the value of a community. Now, I should have known that because in college I actually lived with the Amish for a little less than a year. And I understood that special feeling of security that they have, knowing that when something goes wrong, they're not alone, even at the toughest moments. But I had forgotten that feeling. And that's what I had to get back. And so I had to be brave, and I had to make this first call, and it may have been to Lee, and I had to do something that I had never really done. That is, I had to ask him for help, and what's more, I had to ask him for money. And I was really surprised because the more calls I made, there was a response that came back. And somebody said, and I'll never forget it, it wasn't Lee, by the way, they said, "I thought you'd never ask." And then they thanked me for giving them the opportunity to help. And I was dumbfounded. I couldn't even imagine why they were thanking me for giving me money, for me asking for help. And that is, again, when I understood the power of what happens when you bring together a community around a cause. Now, meanwhile, Sam was growing up, and I hadn't kept my promise, and we hadn't found a cure yet. And if we fast forward, Sam's now 13, about 3 years ago, and I was invited to the University of Illinois, Chicago branch, where they were going to do a stem cell transplant. And so they asked me, and I was able to suit up and be a part of when the pancreas came in and when they stripped the cells out, and then actually when they did the stem cell transplant. And they took an individual who had had diabetes, and he walked out of there and he didn't need insulin anymore. And I couldn't wait to get home to tell Sam. And I was so excited. I got home. I actually woke him up because this happened during the middle of the night. We finished about 7 a.m. in the morning. And I told him this story, and I said, "Listen, this is a cure. I saw it this morning with my own eyes. And the only thing is you have to be older than, you have to have stopped growing because you have to take anti-rejection drugs." But I said to him, "We're going to get you a stem cell transplant, and the only thing we have to do is keep you healthy until then." And so Sam, as kids do, asked 2 questions. And the first question, he said, "Dad, I thought these stem cell transplants are really expensive." And I said to him, "Well, Sam, I've worked really hard, and I think we'll be able to afford it." And then he said, "Well, I thought there weren't enough stem cells to go around for everyone." And so I said to him, "Well, don't worry, you'll be one of the lucky ones." And then Sam said, "Is that fair?" And so at that moment, I learned from my son what community really means. And that means we're all in this together. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I said, "Well, we'll just have to find a cure for everyone." And then he said, "Great, what's for lunch?" And so my life had changed again in a very dramatic way. Well, today we know that finding a cure for everyone is going to take longer and be harder than I think all of us ever imagined. But we'll get there for Danielle, for Sam, for all of your children, and for the millions of adults. In fact, today, there's more adults over the age of 18 with this disease that we call juvenile diabetes than there are under the age of 18. And that's why when you heard Jeffrey Brewer talk about the artificial pancreas and making sure that we keep people alive and healthy while we're searching for a cure is so important. And the interesting fact about the artificial pancreas is 5 years ago, it didn't exist. And your generosity and people like you who bet on it are what made that happen and what will change the life for Danielle and for many people. And so now is the time that I get to ask for your help. And the beauty of a community is that it shares both happy times and sad times together, and then it rises to the occasion when it needs to. We saw that recently during the terrible storms here in the Raleigh area and across North Carolina. And I was proud that our people at Allscripts not only reached out to help our own employees, but they reached out more broadly to help others. And that's the same spirit that I hope we have tonight. You know, I want to close my comments with a comment that John Kennedy made. He said, "Let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking his blessings and his help, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own." Tonight, it's up to us to take the steps we need to take to find a cure. So I ask you, as a part of Fund a Cure tonight, to please be generous and please do your part as a part of our larger community to help us find a cure. Thank you very much.